Hi there, everybody. My name is Pete BarenBregge. I'm the jazz editor for Alfred Music, and I'm very excited today to speak with Mike Kamuf. Mike, I'm going to read a little bio that's been prepared, Mike, but I'll tell you some more about Mike in a minute. Mike is has had a multifaceted music career as an active educator, composer, arranger, and performer. He is an exclusive composer and arranger for Alfred Music with titles in our jazz catalog, our string orchestra catalog, and concert band catalogs. So thank you, Mike, for joining us today.
Absolutely.
So
Thanks for having me, Pete.
before we start talking, let me tell this audience about you. I think I've actually known you a long time, and probably well before you started writing for Alfred.
Yes.
I knew Mike as a player primarily, and I knew he was a band director, and I knew he was a composer, arranger. But my real knowledge of you was as a player. We played in some bands together, and I heard you play, and you probably heard me play over the years. So,
Absolutely.
and then somehow, I'm not sure exactly. You can tell me later how I got hip to the fact that you're such a great writer. In this case, for jazz, for me, and anyhow, so then we started working on that, and you wrote a couple of great arrangements that were very successful. And the fact that you are a middle school band director, and at the grade level you were focusing on for jazz ensemble, it was perfect because I considered you the ideal arranger and composer because the music was essentially road tested. You
Right.
have students, and you would have them play it. And, sometimes people write things that are a little too difficult or kind of awkward, but you really have a knack for nailing it exactly right.
Well, thank you.
And you're a great player too, man. So you're multifaceted. And I want people to be aware of all the feathers in your cap. So
Well,
it's
thank you.
a
Appreciate
joy
that.
to have you here, man, and speak with
Yeah.
you.
Honored to be here. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. So
Yeah.
let me ask you a couple of questions here, and we'll
Sure.
get a little conversation going if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned we've been friends for many years, and you've been a full-time teacher for forever, and raising a family, playing gigs, and writing music. And now you're writing a lot of music. I mean, you write for
A lot of it.
jazz, for concert band, for orchestra. That's a lot of stuff. How do you juggle all that stuff?
Not well all the time. it's it is a it's quite difficult at times. I think trying to keep school in a time zone, like, okay, I'm going to deal with it not just during work hours, but like I'm going to stop at this point and switch over. Evenings are generally during the school year when I get a chance to sit down and sink my teeth into writing and get my head wrapped around different projects. I'm going to do that later this evening after I have dinner with my family. I'm working on something for Chris Bernitas in the band side. So that'll be my focus this evening. So it's kind of like evenings and weekends. I have to juggle my time. Sometimes it's just a little. It can be overwhelming at times. I try to, during the typical school year, I try not to take any projects on during the month of December and May when we're doing concerts, and that's our big concert season when we're actually in school. So I try to avoid doing any kind of major projects during that time, if at all. Sometimes I just don't even do any writing at all during the month of December and May, just because it's just too much with everything that's school related. Now this year it's a little different because of the online learning and the absence of physical performances. So it's a little different, but there's still some time consuming things with, we are going to try our hand at virtual performances. We've done one just with three of our ensembles, just audio, not video. So that's coming down the road. We're waiting till after the holidays to do that. But so it's a constant struggle to manage time. So sometimes I manage my time well, sometimes I don't, and I pay for it later. But
Well, I think it's amazing that you can juggle all those things at once. So
well,
I don't
thanks.
know how you do it, but keep up the good work.
Well, thank you.
Here's another question for you. In your youth, can you tell me either who or what was your major musical inspiration or mentor, or what
Oh,
got
wow.
you hooked here?
Well, it started with my father and his record collection that was just absolutely unbelievable. Everything from Louis Armstrong to Charlie Parker to Count Basie, Max Roach, on up through rock and roll. He had in his collection some classic rock. So, just his musicianship and his love of music was my first inspiration. And then he took me to my first concert when I was almost 11 years old. Was Maynard Ferguson at
All right.
Palace Theater in Cleveland, Ohio. Had a ticket stub from it for the longest time. I don't have it anymore. April something 1978. So Rocky had just come out. He was at the peak of his powers, and I'm a 10-year-old kid sitting there just listening, like, oh my God. So that was huge. And then I had some great mentors along the way. Tony Leonardi and Asoto Pellegrini at Youngstown State University when I did my undergrad there. Been very influential. Tony was just a treasure trove of information, and both of them were actually, and just great manners and very inspiring. So they kind of set my path for me for as far as writing and trumpet playing goes. And a gentleman by the name of Sam D'Angelo, who was also Dave Ravello's teacher for a long time. Dave was much closer with Sam than I was, but I did get an opportunity to work with Sam on and off for about 3 years, and he was a huge inspiration to me and mentor to me. So those gentlemen really did it. But my father was the main inspiration. He was a drummer too. He played, I wouldn't say professionally, but he played, like with his buddies and my uncle and my godfather in a band that worked around the Cleveland area for about 25 years. I still have his Gretsch drum kit, and pretty cool. So
I was just going to ask you if your father was a musician in addition to having a great record collection.
Yeah, drummer. He was good. He used to record his gigs on reel to reel, and we have a family friend actually had some of them and transferred them over digitally. My dad could swing. He sounded pretty good. He stopped playing shortly after I was born, so I never got on a gig with him or anything like that. But he sounded good. He was in the pocket, swinging hard. It was good.
Good.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat. Yeah. So I would imagine as a young kid here in Maynard is like your jaw was on the floor, right?
That was it. That was it. I mean, and I heard, and I right around the same time, my parents drugged me to hear the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, and I got to hear Percy Humphrey from that group too. So that was like a big inspiration too, because he kind of sounded like Louis Armstrong to me. So like those two events were pretty big as far as my trumpet playing was concerned, and that kind of set the tone. And my godfather lent me my first trumpet, and that was it.
Yeah, well, those are pretty clear inspirations, man. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Set the wheels in motion early.
Well, good for you. So when you were a kid in your music programs as a student yourself, do you have any kind of prominent memory that you can recall of either inspirationally or something that happened that was kind of unique?
You mean kind of early on, you mean?
Yeah, like when you were a kid in a school band,
Yeah. Yes. My high school band director I went to a Catholic high school outside of Cleveland, Padua Franciscan High School in Parma, Ohio. And Wayne Miller was the band director there for 35, almost 40 years. And he kind of let me write for the jazz band. Stage band is what they called it at that point. But he let me write all the time. Anytime I wanted to bring something in, I was allowed to bring it in. And that was huge because, I was just fooling around studying scores that I got from various places. Another music publisher used to put out small scores back in the day. And that's how I taught myself how to do everything. So I was kind of just having the jazz band there as a lab for me. That was huge. So my high school band director, he couldn't have done much more to promote my writing than to let me have a lab band like that all the time. So that was pretty great.
I mean, so you were like in high school and you were already writing for the high school jazz band?
Yeah. I did my first chart. It was Moon Dance by Van Morrison. And with a solo section and everything, and a little shout and the coda and everything. It was pretty good. It was. I don't know if it was good, but it had a beginning and an end in the middle, and it was okay. And that was the first one. And then pretty much every concert we did something we did like 3, 4 concerts a year. So I did that. And we also had a brass ensemble that played at the school masses because it was a Catholic high school. And we did a mass about once a month, and we had a brass group that played. So I often took hymns and arranged it for the brass. It was a sextet, and I arranged it. So early on, I got schooled in writing parts out for everybody, and adapting traditional harmony for brass instruments, and it was just trial and error, situations like that. And it was pretty cool. And my band director was not the person that ran the masses. It was somebody else. It was another, it was actually a friar there at the school. So he ran the masses, and he would say, "Hey, can you arrange this hymn for me?" And he would give me a copy of the hymnal and say, "Here, this is, I need this. I need an arrangement of this." And a week later or so, I'd have it done, and then have the guys do it, and we'd rehearse it at lunch or whatever and try it out. So early on, high school was a very big laboratory experience for me as far as writing music goes.
That is the ideal scenario for a young person who ultimately became a professional arranger, composer, and educator, as you are, but to have the luxury of not only having a good man to play your stuff, but to have a director that would be open to that. I mean, like, let's face it, someone was, "Well, Johnny, I don't want you to, I want to waste all the time,
Oh, right.
to let you
Yeah.
do it,
Yeah, it was Wayne Miller was a great inspiration, and I actually studied trumpet with him during my high school years, and he was wonderful. And just this the fact that he opened things up for me to do allowed me to write for the band. It was just amazing. So trial and error, and it was a lot of fun. So
Yeah.
great learning experience. Yeah.
I would think, as far as writing for the jazz ensemble, AKA stage band at the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
that you figured out, I hate to say format, but like, there's an introduction, there's the melodies stated, there's a couple solos, there's a
Right.
little development and the recapitulation, and then ending. So there's a
Yeah.
little structure here. So you figure that out quickly just by natural observation, right?
Yeah. And one of the right around this time, there's this high school, ninth through 12th grade, somewhere around 8th and 9th grade, my dad found at a record store the Thad Jones, Mel Lewis Live at the Village Vanguard. Like, he had some other Thad and Mel stuff, but he didn't have that one. And that album, still, I have his copy of it. That is, for me, that did it. And that I have that album memorized, everything memorized on that whole album, every lick, every solo, I can sing the whole thing. But that album was a game changer for me. And how Thad wrote on that album, and Brookmeyer too, just my brain or whatever at that point was processing that and form, and not the harmony, but I was getting a hand on form and how to put a larger scale composition together.
Well, that's the perfect model.
Yeah.
I was so lucky myself in college. With a friend of mine, we go up to New York, and I get to hear at the Village Vanguard Thad and Mel's big band, and I can just just those guys,
sound,
player for player giants in New York, and then the energy and the execution and the joy that everybody in the band and the audience, of course, had was
right. Well, in that recording, Live at the Village Vanguard, it sounds like a party. I mean, that whole Thad's encouraging everybody. There's the band's killer, and everything's just, that's one of the greatest recordings in the history of jazz. But just the atmosphere that's going on that you described, it's apparent, like on all those live recordings. It's just amazing. And that spoke to me too, that everybody was having a great time while they were doing it too. That's another thing that came out of that. So yeah.
Very good. Let me ask you another question. As you write music, you will encounter obstacles sometimes, whether it be something in the song or the composition, if it's an original thing you're thinking of, or can you talk about some ways to I mean, even a writer's block, as it were, how do you
Right.
overcome some of the obstacles you have to personally deal with when you write?
Sure. So one of the things, if I run into writer's block, as I have a few things that I do. There's nothing more intimidating than I used to say a blank score page. Now it's a blank screen, right? Because but I still sketch a few things out on paper here and there. But one of the things that I like to do is I like to just listen to as many different versions of, like if I'm doing an arrangement. I'll give you a great example. One of the tunes that you had me write for 2021, we sort of had this conversation on email that I had one version of the tune ingrained in my brain. So it was really difficult for me to set that aside and not to hint at that as I was doing it. So I listened to several different versions of that tune in particular, and I try to avoid big band versions so that, because then I don't want to rob somebody else's idea or morph somebody else's idea. I want to make my own. So I think just listening to as many different versions of the tune as possible. If you're arranging a standard or a jazz standard or a great American standard, or whatever it is you're arranging that's not yours. That is when I get into a rut for my own things, I tend to give it time and walk away. And that seems to help too, just not forcing things and just letting things happen organically and not put a square peg in a round hole, so to speak, when you're writing, because then it just, if you're forcing things, then it just doesn't work. And, the other thing too is don't be afraid that when I'm writing, I don't be afraid to delete or do a save as on the file. If you're working on the file and just say, okay, I don't like the way this is going, let me try this. And then you compare notes at the end. That's another way around it too. And then sometimes I find that, a myriad or a merging of those ideas works too. So it just depends on the situation. Every situation is a little different with writer's block, but fortunately I don't have that too often. Once I get going on a project, it just kind of flows and we get going. And then my wife is also a great soundpost for me too. She's an awesome musician and a great educator, and she'll give me some feedback on what are you doing that there for. But for the most part, I tend to work through things just by listening to different versions of tunes.
Good. Do you have any big plans to close things up here? Any big plans on your horizon, musically or otherwise?
Well, this is year 29 in the classroom, and it's what a year to be at this point in my career in the classroom, kind of dealing with the online learning. I can't wait to get back to the classroom. I do think we're going to have some gaps in there, but I'm looking forward to getting back and working with kids, whatever capacity that is and whenever it is. But that's the big thing right now is just I want to get back into the classroom with kids and do that. I just continue to look forward to the writing projects. I have a few non-Alfred things that I'm doing after the holidays, and then we'll get our oars in the water for 2022. For those that are watching this, we already have 2021 pretty much worked out with all the catalogs and everything, and I'm really excited about all the music that's coming out for the ensembles that I've written for 2021 as well. So I'm just excited about being a part of the Alfred family and keeping writing, and it's a great thing.
Well, that's good to hear. Good to hear.
Yeah.
All right. So if you have any final comments you want to make, I guess you kind of just did one, but
no, I think this is great. Thanks for having me. I didn't know we were doing this this series of questions. This was a great idea, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So thanks for including me. Yeah.
Our pleasure. Absolutely. Nice to see you again, Mike.
Good to see you, Pete.
We'll talk, and all the best to you, and have a good year.
All right. Same here. Thank you, Pete.